Hi, everyone. I am Cedar Liu, and today my group member Gabriel Hu, Patrick Li, Thomas Li, Yuming Zhong, and I are excited to present our case study on Procter & Gamble P&G. Next slide. First, I'm going to introduce company's nature and the event major player. Procter & Gamble is a multinational corporation operating in the consumer goods industry, producing a wide range of the products from personal care to household cleaning items. The business scandal unfolded between P&G and Banker Trust, involving complex and risky derivative transactions called a leverage interest rate swap. The principal participants in the scandal were P&G, who failed to mislead and subsequently filed a lawsuit against Bank Trust, accusing it of various counts of financial misconduct, and Bank Trust, who facilitated the disputed derivative products. Within Banker Trust, Kevin Houston, the managing director, and Alison Bernard, the vice president, were key individuals to discuss the details and its implication to P&G as captured in a release-tabbed conversation. Procter & Gamble utilized derivative securities, tried to minimize their financing costs and hedge against their risk, specifically concerning interest and rate fluctuation. The derivative in question are OTC leverage interest rate swap proposed by Bank Trust. By entering this swap, P&G aimed to produce financing at a reduced cost by collecting premium from writing put options on interest rates. However, these derivatives were riskier and more complex than the standard interest rate swaps. Next slide.
The problem came from the use of leveraged interest rate swap, which gambled on interest rate remaining low. In addition to a standard interest rate swap, the derivative product Banker Trust design involved a speculative put option on U.S. Treasury bonds, meaning that P&G were to suffer substantial loss when interest rate rise. P&G was unaware of this mechanic and subsequently had no idea of the extent of the potential loss with the risk involved. Next slide, please. The eventual outcome for P&G was that it suffered $152 million loss from early closing of the two leveraged interest rate swaps. P&G believed it was misled by Bankers Trust and initiated a lawsuit. Because P&G effectively relied on Bankers Trust to provide financial expertise, the lawsuit was settled out of court and P&G had to pay $35 million instead. Next slide, please. There are three main lessons that can be learned from the case. First, companies that deal with derivatives need to understand what they're buying. In the case of P&G, they were completely ignorant about the fact that the leveraged swaps contain a put option, which led to the debacle. Furthermore, it is important to never fully rely on another company for expertise without having the capacity to evaluate the validity of the advice received. Second, it is important to address the risk of encountering worst-case scenarios. P&G should have conducted stress testing to form some expectation of the downside risk of the leveraged swaps. Finally, according to a recording of Bankers Trust Managing Director Kevin Hudson, when P&G lost around $17 million due to interest rate hike, P&G was actually unaware of this fact and never actually bothered to ask Banker Trust about its position. This highlights the importance of companies with OTC tailor-made derivatives to be vigilant even though their gains and losses are not immediately recognized. It is necessary for companies to establish some sort of reporting system for internal use so that it is always easy to detect problems early on to avoid substantial losses in the future. Next slide, please.
We'd consider P&G Treasury operation as a cost center. As we talked in previous slides, in early 1990s, their financing policy helped the company achieve an effective financing cost below the benchmark rate. However, a few years later, due to the rise of 5-year CMT yields and decrease of the 30-year Treasury price, the leveraged swap, which could have saved $1.5 million interest expense, cost them to spend even more. If P&G were to choose a treasury operation as a profit center, it should request the Bankers Trust to include a ceiling instead of a floor for the equivalent to avoid the costly debacle. They also need to short the futures contract to make profit if they think the yield is going to go up and bond price is going down. Next slide, please.
So the first reason that the mismatch spread formula is much riskier than formula built around the differential in yields and price is that when interest rate change, the yield and price move in opposite direction. And the second reason is that bonds with long maturity are highly sensitive to the change of interest rate. So when interest rate goes up, the 5-year MT yield also goes up for a bit, but the 30-year treasury price will go down a large amount, resulting in a huge spread. Next slide, please. And for the break-even analysis, first we calculate the 30-year treasury coupon rate and yield based on the value provided on table 1. And then we put the table in Excel and build up formula behind those numbers. Some of these numbers are slightly different from the original table, but we think those are because of the rounding difference in either coupon rates or maybe the yields. Finally, we use GoSeek to find out the 2 break-even points. As we can see here on our table, when the 5-year MT yield goes up by 62 basis points to 5.57, the spread is 0. And when the 5-year MT yield goes up by 64 basis points to 5.59, the equivalent interest payment is 0. It's worth to point out that our second break-even point is 2 basis points less than the value provided in the case, but we think it's still due to the rounding issues. Next slide, please.
Should the judge have ruled in favor of P&G on the issue of fiduciary responsibility? I don't think so. Even though the banker's trust should have disclosed some material information like the spread and leverage for the P&G before entering into the transaction, P&G itself should do enough research and analysis multiple scenarios, especially the worst case, at the very beginning. If it doesn't have an experienced consulting team within the firm, it could seek help from a professional third party. Next slide, please.
So lastly, we would like to say there are multiple methods can be adopted by P&G to mitigate the interest rate risk, interest rate risk embedded the leverage swap. For example, the company can consider selling the future contracts to short if the interest rate increased to offset the loss generated from the swap. And also the firm's strategy team can use the option. Specifically, if the interest rate increases, they can purchase the interest rate call options to ensure the companies can have a fixed rate. From our team's perspective, we expect its approximate cost of the hedge to be more than 75 basis points because, according to the case, the downside risk caused by the embedded options is large. In addition, if the interest rates started to rise in the future, the estimated hedging expenses will also increase. The reason is that if the company still wants to, do the risk mitigation, the cost of purchasing hedging options will also increase. Therefore, before creating the strategies, P&G should consider more marketing and possible increase of the interest rate to protect the company's profit. And the last page is about our reference.
Thanks for listening our presentation.